everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Weep from the Winnipeg Free Press. Together, we are Kenny and Renny. We are still Kenny and Renny, even after all this time. I think it's, 2 months since we've done a show, or pretty close to that. But we've been missing this. I've been very busy. Ken's been very busy golfing. One of us seems to have a job. The other one, I don't know how he's making it work, but that's how he does. Ken does what he does, and that's how he does. But it's great to be back. We wanted to have a show here, a show there, a show everywhere as we go down the stretch here. Important times here, lots to talk about. We can talk about the draft. Both Ken and I are down here in Las Vegas, ready to cover it. What we expect to be, an interesting time for the Winnipeg Jets in the coming hours here, maybe even definitely leading into the draft. I can talk about the NHL awards. Just finished talking with Connor Hellebuck backstage after he won his second Vezina Trophy, adding him to, I think if you take a look at the list of any goaltender that has won more than one Vezina Trophy, they're the kind of goalies that their names ring out in history. I think he stepped into that kind of echelon, no doubt. And we'll talk a little bit about the Stanley Cup final. I've been on the road basically since mid-May covering the Oilers. First their victory over the Dallas Stars, and then their oh-so-close series against the Florida Panthers. Got a heavy dose of Paul Maurice during that series. Lots to talk about when it comes to that. So let's get the guy that loves to talk about these kind of things in here, everybody. It's been too long since you've heard this music, so let's play it. The best music in the business, everybody. Here comes Kenny. Kenny, you got to see it earlier on today. We went out for a good brunch. The four of us, Mrs. Kenny and Mrs. Renny, along for the ride. I had to go straight from there to go talk to Craig Conroy, who was at the hotel right next door to where we were eating. I got to say, the boys, Frankie and the boys of Vittorio Rossi, set me up nice on this trip. Tons of compliments on the stuff that I was wearing. People asking where to get it. And I was like, well, listen, if you're in Winnipeg, I know where you need to go because these guys will do you up right. I've looked like $1 million through these playoffs. And I really want to thank Frankie and the boys for what they did for me down the stretch here. It's easy to look good when you've got guys like that in your corner. So if you want to look good, you got to get them in your corner too, and that's easy. All you got to do is head on down to Corden Avenue, walk and loudly proclaim Kenny and Renny sent you, ask for Frankie and the boys, and they will do you up right, no doubt. I'm missing dinners at the Keg. I thought we were supposed to end the season with a dinner at the Keg. That never ended up happening.
That's right.
I want to say great job by them keeping the Kenny and Renny audience fed throughout the season with the $50 gift certificate per show, and keeping the whistles wetted, of course, was our fine folks at TCB, who we once again thank them for them allowing us to be so generous and gift an 8-pack per show that we did. Hey, if you joined us at the very last KNR of the year, it was an absolute smashing success. It was a great time. It was a fun time. There was so much food there. We had to roll 7 or 8 of you out of the restaurant afterwards. So that was great. We're just looking forward to the future with these partnerships that we've had here and more that we'll talk about later on in the show. But just absolutely fun to have them back for these next couple of shows we're going to do here. Before we sail into the sunset of the summer, Ken, before we do that, how are you doing? What's Kenny been up to these last 2 months that I haven't really seen yet?
Yeah, buddy, you've been doing a great job on the playoff trail, and excellent work for that. Yesterday was the 2-year anniversary when we were on the ice covering the Avalanche Stanley Cup
Yes.
championship. And
Just saw Andrew Cogliano pass by after he retired.
Awesome.
I remember, well, it's maybe the most boneheaded thing I ever did on the ice that night you're talking about. He'd had a broken hand that he'd been suffering through the playoffs, and he held it out for me to shake his hand, and I gave it not like a light, I gave it kind of the squeeze,
buddy,
and then he winced. And anyways, he was a Stanley Cup champion. I'm sure he's gotten over that. Congrats to him on a great career. Yeah.
And one of the great guys we liked, the insightful guys we enjoyed talking to, and he's going to be doing a great job moving into a management role with the Avalanche. But yeah, fun night here at the NHL Awards, Sean. I mean, you had the backstage access there that I didn't have, but had a really good chat with Connor Hellebuyck.
Not as glamorous as you think, Ken. It's not as glamorous as you think.
Well, hey, it's not every day the guy standing beside you gets a call from the great one,
That's a good story that we'll tell here right away.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. But just, I mean, we're going to focus this around the Jets, and I thought Connor Hellebuyck had a really nice blend of a lot of class in the speech, the acceptance speech at the podium, and in his media session afterward, he spoke for just under 10 minutes, had a couple of good laughs and told some good stories. And we know he's very calm and collected in the crease, but I mean, he made it clear that his summer goalie coach Randy Wilson from back home gave him the gears. He missed him in the speech back in 2020 when he won his first Vezina. So shared that little nugget and told a little story about how he became a goalie and said, my brother took shots on me, and I, kind of calm fashion, he said, I kind of had a knack for stopping the puck, and it's something that he continues to do at the NHL level, and certainly reinforced his belief that he's happy to win Vezinas, but the real trophy that he wants to win is that Stanley Cup. He had a lot of nice things to say about Rick Bowness, Scott Arniel, Dylan DeMello re-signing, and we're going to dig into all those topics. But fun night overall. It's the first awards session that I took part in the live sense, and nice for the NHL folks. I think in years past there was kind of a limited number of media members involved in the viewing, and just the way that the setup was, we were able to check it out a little bit too. So nice night here in Vegas. And Sean, I mean, the real fun is about to begin. Again, this doesn't come as any surprise. We expected Connor Hellebuyck to win his second Vezina. He garnered 31 of the 32 first place votes and won it in decisive fashion. But I mean, again, Connor Hellebuyck wasn't happy with how the playoffs went. He made it clear that he, went through the debriefing period and got himself, getting himself into the summer mindset, and he's ready to pursue that big trophy that was handed out on Monday when you saw, Paul Maurice get to raise that cup and hand it to Jamie Compon. We know there's obviously other Winnipeg connections there with Kevin Stenlund and Dmitry Kulikov, but certainly that was a moment that a lot of people in the province of Manitoba and around the hockey world, Sean, a lot of people were happy to see Paul Maurice win that first and elusive Stanley Cup. Well, it's not elusive anymore, I guess.
Yeah, we'll get to that after we close out the awards here, because I mean, boy, oh boy, talk about comments that it's interesting. A lot of the other media really scratching their head over the Winnipeg comments. I'll get to why in a little bit, but just to close out the awards, my second awards that I took part in, this one a little bit more. So I was behind the scenes, behind the stage, which is not as glamorous as I said, as it sounds. They brought them back. Basically, they left the stage and came straight over to us, where I had conversations with all the winners on this night. Connor Hellebuyck, great. I asked him essentially about, we'll have put this stuff up on the website, on the Sportsnet website, but asked him about, like I'd said, you win 2 Vezina trophies. There's a lot of names on that list of guys who won 1 Vezina, where it's like, okay, a guy popped up and had a really good season. They're all really good goalies at some point, but you start winning more than 1 Vezina and your name starts to ring out with some of the greatest games ever played. Now, Dominik Hasek had a bunch. Brodeur had a bunch. There's a lot of goalies that stacked a lot of Vezinas up there. So Connor Hellebuyck clearly has a long way to go in that respect. But I'll tell you this, once you've won 2, you are, in my opinion, you are put into a place where your name kind of starts to ring out through history. I asked him about that. He had a great response on that, I thought.
What did he say? For folks who didn't,
go check it out. I don't want to. It wasn't on the broadcast. It's on the website.
Sorry,
you can go check that kind of stuff out. That's kind of stuff people can go elsewhere. We can stick to what we're doing. I thought, talked with Connor Bedard. I thought thought it was kind of fascinating with Connor Bedard. It was a year ago tomorrow that he was drafted. So what a year for this young player, right? On the 28th of June, he gets drafted. Let's say the clock starts that way and it rolls all the way around to this day. So the year ends essentially with him winning the Calder Trophy. The second 18-year-old to win that award, right? No, it says there's 6 18-year-olds who did it. But a lot of those guys had already turned 19 by the time they get the award. Connor Bedard is still 18 years old. His birthday isn't until the 11th. He's the second youngest player to win the award. Guess who's the first? The youngest player to ever win that trophy. I'll give you a hint. I think you'll get this. I'll give you a hint. He won 2 awards tonight.
The Nate Dog.
Nathan MacKinnon is the youngest player to ever win the Calder Trophy. I believe his birthday is September 1st. So either way, you are watching greatness when you see a player lock in that trophy at the age of 18, like get drafted, walk into the league and win it. Extremely, extremely hard to do. So what we saw is historical out of Connor Bedard this year, and then transferring over, of course, to Nathan MacKinnon. Best moment of the night for me is as we start interviewing him, he's like, God, my phone's ringing off the hook here. Let me just grab it out of my pocket so I can turn it off. And he looks, and it's Wayne Gretzky calling. And basically he cuts out of the interview to go talk to Wayne after that. And then he couldn't get through to him. So he came back, we did the interview, and then the interview ends with him once again getting a call. But the first question was, of course, like, listen, I'm the national media. You don't blow off Sean Reynolds for anyone except for maybe Wayne Gretzky. And he had talked about, the surreal moment it was for him to be in that position. But Nate MacKinnon, I don't have a vote, Ken. I would have voted for him. In fact, I
voted for him. I'm happy to tell you.
And I would expect that you would have. To me, I mean, I thought John Cooper, who I bumped into the other night, and gave me a lot of really interesting insight on a team that played the Florida Panthers quite often, and another coach that really, really knows how to talk to the media the way that we see from Paul Maurice. But he had made a real push to try and have Kucherov win that award. It was a good debate that he had. They were clinging to a playoff spot, and at the same time, just trying to get into the playoffs was the Pittsburgh Penguins. And there was a lot of people saying, where would the Pittsburgh Penguins be without Sidney Crosby dragging them up? Well, where would, the Tampa Bay Lightning and Nikita Kucherov where would the Tampa Bay Lightning have been without Nikita Kucherov, who was something like 50 points up on the next closest player on that team? Tough choices all around. I do think that Nathan MacKinnon was just so bombastic this year. It was hard not to give him that award. But Ken, did you want to share with us if you had picked everyone on the stage tonight first?
We don't have to get into everybody, but I think this was the toughest. I think Elliot Friedman has mentioned, multiple times. It's probably the hardest vote. Not necessarily for number one. Yes, there were deserving candidates, but I think the field was very deep for those 5 slots. And again, like it depends on what are you valuing. I mean, you had 200 assist guys. You had the total package. I mean, Nathan MacKinnon had points in 40 of 41 home games, I think, 39 of 41, but just an incredible season. We've long appreciated the way that he's played. That's to take nothing away from Austin Matthews' 69 goals and what Connor McDavid did and what Kucherov did. All impressive. Like, he could have gone 4 deep and made a case for all 4. But for me, I just thought the most impactful season was by Nathan MacKinnon. That's why I voted him number 1. And, a lot of people have beefs with how the PHWA voters weigh in on a lot of occasions. Well, guess what? The players gave Nathan MacKinnon the Ted Lindsay Award also as MVP, voted on by, the 700 plus players who are members of the NHLPA and were in the league this year. So not that I felt like I needed any convincing or reinforcement, but the players also voted that way, despite all of the incredible seasons by all of those 4 players that I mentioned. But yeah, very deserving. I know a lot of people thought he should have won over Taylor Hall. Full disclosure, I voted for Taylor Hall that year 1, and I voted MacKinnon 2. Over the years, I've given it a lot of thought. You could make the case of going the other way. I don't regret the decision, but I could have easily made the case for MacKinnon that year too. I just thought that on a playoff team, Hall was so much further ahead than the next guy, but that's not the only intangible. I mean, Nathan MacKinnon, we've seen him. He impacts the game on so many different levels. With all due respect to the other three players in that discussion, none of them play defense at the level, none of them play the total package game. Austin Matthews always obviously improving. Kucherov is mostly a non-factor in the defensive zone. It would be below average probably on a lot of metrics. And, Connor McDavid is obviously elite in terms of an offensive talent, but let's not confuse him with Alexander Barkov defensively, even though, Sean, you saw firsthand, McDavid, even in game 6, played strong defense, was an impactful player, even though he had no points in game 6. But to me, Nathan MacKinnon, I know he's also not a Selke winner either, but I think his impact on the game was why he deserved to be the MVP this year, just in terms of his overall game and just how much he drives the engine. Yes, we understand Cale Makar is one of the best defensemen in the NHL, but it was a down year on a number of regards for Makar, and it was MacKinnon that drove the bus. And the other year, MacKinnon and Rantanen were kind of neck and neck in the MVP voting, and it was tough to have a distinction between the two. But this year, it was clear that MacKinnon was driving the bus, and I just thought he was the best player in the league during the regular season. And then, we saw what he did in round 1.
Let's touch on Rat River Rebel quick before we move on from the awards, the opinions on the Norris Trophy. I'll just go quick on this one. Yep. I mean, I've said this before. I think awards are about, like, hardware matters because it's supposed to be a record that people can go back to later and say, okay, this was the guy who's the best player in the league at the time. I've said this time and time again. I think that, I don't blame it on you personally, Kenny, but I think that the Writers Association, well, okay, let's do it. Let's make it easier. Let's just make it easier. And I'm going to put all the blame on Kenny. What have you been doing this whole time? I don't think there's a proper representation of who's been the best player in the game. Like, in my opinion, Connor McDavid has been the best player in the league every single year he's been in the league, except his rookie year and except the year that Leon Draisaitl won it. Right. And so for me, what happens is he's won 3 so far. But here's another example. You go back, Sidney Crosby has only won 2 Hart trophies, right? He's won less than Alexander Ovechkin. I think it would be pretty hard to suggest, and maybe I'm out there to say that, but I think it's hard to suggest that he's not the more complete player and not the better player than Alexander Ovechkin is in his career. But history is probably not going to reflect that. Now, maybe he's going to keep going at the pace he's going at right now. I think he's got a shot at being the 4th, 3rd, 2nd highest scorer of all time, but he's not going to win any more Hart trophies. And we're going to look back on this and be like, how did the 2nd highest scoring player of all time end up with just 2 Hart trophies? Well, newsflash right now, the 2nd highest scoring player of all time in Jaromir Jagr, I believe, only has 1 Hart trophy, right? And so I've said this before. I think somewhere along the lines, I think in the 80s and the 90s, writers got it, that it was a award that was basically supposed to truly reflect what was happening in the league. And then I think over the last number of years, writers have really tried to kind of take it over and be like, I'm going to say something that no one else knows and that I think is really smart, is going to make me look like, oh, you think that guy's the best player in the league? Well, nice try, but it's actually this guy for this obscure reason. I just think there's too much of that going on, and there's not a proper record. So this is one of those years, right? This is a long way of me getting to Cale Makar and saying Cale Makar is the best defenseman in the game. I think he has been for a number of years now, but I actually do think what Quinn Hughes did this year was pretty outstanding, pretty amazing. I don't have a problem with it. It's what I thought was going to happen. But again, if this starts happening too many years, if next year and the year after and the year after Cale Makar is that guy who's in the conversation and not winning the award, and they're finding different reasons to give it to different guys, which I completely and totally think has happened with McDavid, I've got a problem with that, because if that's what happens, I think that the writers are, in the awards that they vote for, are failing to address their responsibility to show history, an accurate representation of what was happening at that time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Quinn Hughes took a step up this year. I mean, he's been a guy who hasn't played a ton of defense, in my eyes, for some of the years. And there were 2 years without Chris Tanev where Quinn Hughes' play dipped, but this year was not one of them. He was exceptional. He worked hard in his own end. His metrics were really good. And again, you and I saw him up close in some of the best hockey he's ever played. Last season, Cale Makar missed too much time for me to vote him number one for the Norris. He missed more than 20 games. This year, some of his underlying metrics weren't as good. I mean, we saw him at the end of the year. He didn't look like himself in that 7-0 blowout, but he sure looked good in the playoffs. So, I mean, again, this isn't always about who's the best player in the league. It's how they play that season. So I think Quinn Hughes was very deserving of the award. And, again, I voted for him number one on my ballot also this year.
All right. Thanks for the question, Rat River Rebel. Let's move on and give the thoughts on the Stanley Cup final. Paul Maurice,
well, you
all
go
the kind of
first.
stuff
You were
that
there,
goes
yeah.
with that.
You
go first. You go first.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of discourse for a long time about Paul Maurice, and I mean, I covered him his entire time here. I had feel like I had a good professional relationship with him. I respect the job that he did. It doesn't mean he's a perfect coach, and he didn't make mistakes here. He certainly did. But what I would say to people, and have said to people on numerous occasions, this is how Paul Maurice wanted the Jets to play. He didn't have since 2018 or 19. He didn't have the personnel to do so. I think that there were definitely times. I mean, you saw it, and you'll get into it. But I mean, again, he was great at the microphone throughout the playoffs. But again, I would also say this: there were a lot of people with a lot of ammunition waiting for Paul Maurice to lose Game 7 and dump all of the losing his coach in hockey. He blew the biggest lead in the Stanley Cup final. But you can't say that, and you can't say that because he did everything that he could to get his team ready for a Game 7 when they were reeling, when they were on the ropes. And it didn't transpire that way. If you want to rip the guy for, adjustments that Chris Knobloch and his coaching staff and players made in the 3 games they won, you better give him credit when his team finds a way to stop the snowball that's running downhill and find a way to win a Game 7 in tidy fashion. And, oh, by the way, keep 2 of the top 5 players in the absolute NHL off the board entirely in that Game 7 in a playoff where, to bring up the great 1-1 last time, Connor McDavid broke the all-time assist record for the entire playoffs. They kept him off the board for Games 6 and 7. And that's not a knock on McDavid, who had an incredible playoff. It is a tip your hat scenario to the Florida Panthers for getting the job done. And again, execution is always the biggest part for me in those games, but you have to give credit and the flowers to Paul Maurice, because guess what? His name is going on the trophy, and a lot of really good coaches never got there. But Paul is a deserving Stanley Cup champion. I loved his post-game speech, and not because he mentioned Winnipeg. Yeah, that was a nice touch for him, sure, and I think he got the wording a little bit wrong. He didn't necessarily mean the next one. He meant, I hope to see them win the Stanley Cup at some point. But what I do think is that the way that he looked into the camera, and this is what we say when, you say it takes a village. When Paul Maurice looked into the camera and talked about his dad's name going up there with his heroes, Beliveau, Lindsay, Howe, and I'm missing one of the Canadians guys, but and Maurice, that's the kind of thing that resonates with not just hockey fans and people who love the game like you and I, Sean. People that have only marginal interest
and CNR fans
see what it means for someone to spend 30 years of their life on the coaching side, and for Paul Maurice, probably 50 plus years chasing that silver trophy and having it that close to your touch and not getting there, and then almost not getting there when you had a 3-0 lead. It's just great stuff and good for him. I mean, again, we talk about it all the time. We don't root for teams in our business. You appreciate people that you come in contact with. Paul is someone who, is a caring individual. He loved the community. And yeah, I get it. Some people will never forgive him for quitting that season, and that's okay. That's their right to do so. But from having talked to Paul Maurice before he took the Florida job, I knew from talking to him, he needed a break. He got that break, and his passion was rekindled. And yes, he got dropped onto a team that won the President's Trophy. That was definitely beneficial for Paul Maurice. But he completely changed the structure of how they play. There were some hiccups, and Sean, they just about missed the playoffs entirely in his first season.
Right.
But he got to the Stanley Cup final 2 years in a row and won the second one. So to me, that has to include some element of really good coaching. And, it's got very little to do with what he did at the podium, which, as members of the media, you can appreciate him filling your notebook. But the guy did a great coaching job.
And there's obviously, he deferred a lot. You were there. He defers to the leadership, but I think that some credit is deserved to him and deserved to Jamie Compon. That was the other great moment, handing the trophy from Maurice to Jamie Compon. We know what Jamie and his wife Tina have gone through in the last 5 or 6 years, or maybe even longer now. That was a touching moment as well. And again, Kevin Stenlund spent part of a year here. He didn't, leave a huge imprint, but he left a big vacancy on the penalty kill. He played a big role in, a good secondary complementary role. And hey, Dmitry Kulikov, people were writing him off years ago. He's a healthy scratch the last couple seasons, whether it was in Minnesota or, sometimes I think even Edmonton. So the fact that he provided important minutes in the Stanley Cup final, good for him. I mean, this is a guy who's, of course, he's a high draft pick and made a lot of money and whatever else, but the guy was chasing a dream. And much like Ron Hainsey before him, he's getting his name on that trophy also because he played well and he earned it.
Yeah. I'm going to try and get through his.
Haven't been to the buffet for a while. Sorry about that.
No, this morning you were. This morning you were, and it was equally impressive. I'll tell you that. But I'm going to just try and go through a bunch of this stuff. It's the coming out party for Barkov. Now, people in the league have known this for a long time. A lot of the fans that we listen to KNR will have known this. But like Gretzky's assertion that he's basically the best defensive player he's seen play since in the last near 40 years or something like that, especially when you've had Bergeron doing what he's been doing all these years. Most fascinating thing for me, I don't know how many people saw the conversation, but Bill Zito, I had a great conversation with him afterwards, and I'd asked him, I've never heard this said before. Ken, I don't know if you're hearing this, but you and I had this conversation before. But Bill Zito, I asked him, as a GM, part of your job is to put chemistry together. His take on it was that he didn't need to do that entirely. He simply just had to go, hey, you need a 20-goal scorer? Let's go get a 20-goal scorer. You want to give a guy a chance like Reinhart, an opportunity to see if he can't become more than he is? We can do that. His assertion was that Sasha Barkov is such an unbelievable leader that there was no chance for chemistry not to work in that dressing room because everybody just gets into line. I've never heard that before. I've talked to a lot of other people who were in hockey before. They'd never heard that before either. It's starting to sound like Barkov is, not just this phenomenal defensive player, yet offensive player, but a leader, the likes of which, there may not have been a lot of them like this in the history of the NHL. So a coming out party for him. I take a look at the Edmonton Oilers. I think they're potentially in a really good place going forward. I thought Dylan Holloway, as a young player drafted after Cole Perfetti, was absolutely phenomenal down the stretch here. He was really good in those games. He didn't score like he did, but that kid is going to get better and better. I like the way he showed up. I think they just fast-forwarded his development by a number of years. Broberg, a guy just like Bouchard that people thought that the Oilers were losing. Broberg was phenomenal once he checked into that series. Again, he didn't play there all year and then checks into the playoffs. I thought was one of their best defensemen, looked really, really good. That's a guy that just fast forwarded 2-3 years of development, and I think the Oilers are going to pay off. And Stuart Skinner, it's so interesting, I find, with the Edmonton Oilers because their goaltending was such a problem for a long time. Whoever came in as soon as they showed a wart, it was like, here we go again. Great team that's getting let down by their goaltending. Stuart Skinner's 24 years old. 24 years old. The vast majority of goaltenders you are going to find don't hit until later than that, including the guy who just won his second Vezina trophy for all you folks out there. Stuart Skinner, I had it posed to me that he very likely, especially when you saw him play down the stretch, because I thought, Ken, after he lost his starting role for a game in that series against the Canucks,
2 games,
he was great. He was great. After that, and I thought he made some in those 3 games where it looked like the Edmonton Oilers kind of steamrolled Florida. There were like, I don't know, like 4, 5, 6, like 10 alarm bell saves that he made diving across the crease. And this is, hey, I'll go back to what we talked about with Connor Hellebuck in the playoffs. One of my assertions was everyone out there who's saying, well, he couldn't have possibly stopped those. I thought in those last 2 series that I covered, the Dallas Stars series and the series that the Edmonton Oilers played in the Cup final, Stuart Skinner made about 5 or 6 of those saves that you are saying Connor Hellebuck couldn't have possibly made. made. He made those saves, and we kind of brush over them. The question was posed to me, is Stuart Skinner the next great Canadian goaltender? He's only 24. He just had this experience. He rose to the occasion at the right time. Are we maybe seeing him ascend to being the next great Canadian goaltender, or at least the next starting goaltender for our team captain, Team Canada, as we start getting to best on best tournaments? Connor McDavid, that was ludicrous what he did. He's doing things we haven't seen in a long time. I thought it was interesting as he climbed the points list. He surpassed Gretzky in 93. This one was one that stood out for me, and that all these people who talk about Gretzky and all he did in the 80s, and he actually wouldn't be that good of a player nowadays. That is just complete and utter BS to me. How old was he in 93? And the league was already starting to get into like butterfly goaltenders. He played against Patrik Laine. It was getting harder and harder to score at that time. He set that record at a time that there wasn't a lot of scoring going on. And you take a look now, the scoring is, look what Nathan MacKinnon did. Look what Nikita Kucherov did. The scoring is back up here again, just like it was back then. I know it doesn't look pretty back then, but I think the difference between Gretzky coming into the league, in the early 80s and still being able to do that in the 90s shows that as the game clamped down and got harder and goalies got better, he just kept finding a way to score. So Chris Knoblauch, I wanted to talk about him quickly.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
Blown away by a guy that I think we talked about this on KNR. I thought it was a bad move. I didn't know enough about him. Great job. Lots of calm, lots of cool, lots of pressure. Met his kid. His kid plays defense, is coming up a hockey player. He's an absolute monster. I shook his hand. Third biggest hand I've ever shaken. The second, we've talked about this before, is Colton Parayko, whose hand is absolutely huge. And the only bigger hand I've shaken than those other two, and I would say Parayko and Knoblauch's son are very, very close, is Brock Lesnar, is the only bigger hand that I've shaken than those guys' hands. Chris Knoblauch's kid is going to be a monster. He's only like 15 or 16. I would have pegged him at 42, 43, maybe. Just absolutely huge. If he ends up getting somewhere, look out for that guy. But that brings me to Paul Maurice. A couple quick things I just wanted to talk about with Paul. The charming stuff. This ain't the Oprah Winfrey show. My feelings don't matter. Yep. All these quotes that drive the media people nuts. You and I were talking about it behind the scenes. A lot of times, my personal opinion, Paul Maurice is really, really good at distracting from the kind of the fire that may be brewing behind the scenes, right? And getting the media to just go. So I felt like I had a front row for all these things because I was in these, I was asking questions, and he'd give these clips, and around you, everyone would just laugh and chuckle, and everything was funny. Everything was, the Broberg been seasoning in the AHL, which is going to get to the McGroarty conversation that we're going to have here. Ken, I told you this. I would sit there and someone would ask a very direct question to Paul Maurice, and he'd give one of these answers. It ain't the Oprah Winfrey show, blah, blah. And everyone would laugh, and all, my Sportsnet would post it, TSN would post it, all the websites would post it. It was everywhere on Twitter. And I'd be sitting there looking around at everyone laughing, and I'd be looking at him and I'd be like, answer the question, because he does a very good job of avoiding talking about the issues by charming people with, the shiny ball that he holds up. And the point I was going to say with that, Ken, you talked about it. I talked with 2 or 3 writers who were ready, if the Oilers won that series, to write the Paul Maurice doesn't have what it takes to get over the top. Right. And he's the reason they didn't win that series story. And I said, okay, but why? Give me the X's and O's of why. And they were kind of humming and hawing. And I said, you can't. But here's the reason you can't. You can't because Paul Maurice never, ever introduces a measuring stick. He never says, we need to get to 5 inches. And in the end, we looked after and they only got to 2.5 inches. He never says, you know what? I put out this game plan and the players didn't follow the game plan, or they didn't reach what we needed to do. I need these guys to defend in this spot here rather than that spot there. Paul Maurice keeps you in the dark and shows you very flashy objects. Now, that had me when he left. I'll give it to you right away. That had me when he left Winnipeg thinking he was going to cover something. What would the things he would do when he was asked about Blake Wheeler's leadership? He would always respond. He wouldn't talk like he talked about Barkov, about how good he was in the room and lifted people up. He would say, follow that guy's work ethic and you'll be okay. But it was also a way of him avoiding the other kind of warts that we knew happened, and he'd never talk about that, right? I thought because of that Paul Maurice maybe was hiding from, the things that were happening. And because of that, Ken, get ready for this moment. We're going to have an intern walk in beside you and hand you the NWO championship belt.
Yeah.
I'm admitting I'm wrong. When he went to Florida, you thought it was a great, great move by Florida. I thought it was a bad move by them at that time. What I take away from what we saw here right now is with a room in which the culture was taken care of, that Paul Maurice didn't have to try and correct the culture. And I think that in Winnipeg, I don't think he was ever able to do that. But in Florida, he didn't have to deal with that. The room was taken care of. Barkov had the room taken care of. Everyone bought in. You didn't have, different tiers of players in the room. And without Paul Maurice having to worry about that, all he had to focus on was hockey, the X's and O's, the game plans, and what he showed is he's able to take a very good team and give them the right game plan to get over the top. That's what we saw from him. Congratulations, Paul Maurice.
For sure. And just the last thing, and this is not a criticism of you, but just because Paul doesn't share it publicly, it doesn't mean he doesn't know he knows exactly what the words are. He just doesn't care to talk about them. And that frustrates you and I at times. But that's also part of what makes him a good coach, is that he's smart enough to know what the problems are, even though he's not as direct and forthcoming as, say, Rick Bowness or Rick Tocchet or Jared Bednar or sometimes John Cooper as well, right?
For sure.
Anyways,
we got to move on. Let's quickly touch on DeMello.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Smart move. I mean, I talked with Dylan this week. Obviously, I also spoke with his defense partner, Josh Morrissey. And hey, people can say what they want. I mean, some people are saying, well, 4.9, that's too much. Well, guess what? I mean, top pairing guys get paid $5 million. I mean, that's the way it goes. And part of the reason the Jets can't afford to go a little bit higher on the salary side, it's not just a Winnipeg tax. Because Josh Morrissey is signed for multiple years at 6.25, they can afford to pay his partner a little bit more. And hey, Dylan DeMello is getting that money from somebody, and the Jets can't afford to lose their second and third best defenseman in the same offseason. Dylan earned that money, and he got it. And I think, I get it. 31, probably not his prime, but he just had 2 great years at 29 and 30. I don't expect him to be falling off a cliff now that he signed a 4-year deal. And Sean, I would say this also. If Dylan DeMello in year 3 or 4 is on the Jets' second or third pairing, that means the Jets have improved their top pairing. Yeah. So that means their defense core as a whole will be better. Yeah. It'll be, this was a kind of, to me, bare minimum move. You needed one of, if not both, of Brendan Dillon and Dylan DeMello. They've secured one of those guys. I think Brendan Dillon is most likely gone to the open market. And I think a new candidate has emerged for me. I think the New Jersey Devils, absolutely a perfect fit for Brendan Dillon. There will be lots of suitors for him. But if people, even if you're Brendan Dillon and you're 33 years old and you play a heavy game, I would go to an Eastern Conference team. The travel is much easier. It will allow you to play a more physical style, a more robust game. Not that he can't do it in the Western Conference. He's done it for a long time there. I just think that it would probably extend his, ability to play at a high level. So, smart move all around. And again, it's up to Dylan DeMello to continue to play at that level, but he is their top guy on the depth chart. Unless they sign a Matt Roy, or if they want to trade for somebody like Brandon Carlo. Well, right now, Dylan DeMello is the top guy. He will stay on the top pairing. Elias Solomonson might be there in 2 or 3 years. But to me, this was a super smart move. And I think it's one that could set up a series of dominoes that we'll get into as we move along.
I've said this, if you go back to the game in the Cup final where Stuart Skinner gives up the puck behind the net and it gets to the front of the net and into the back of the net, it goes past Darnell Nurse, who is kind of just it looked like a lackadaisical play to me that he didn't get in front of that puck. And I understood the reason why. And I'd said this to someone, Dylan DeMello, had he been in that position, would have been down on one knee, had his skate turned, had his stick on the ice, had his foot. He would would have done everything he needed to do to seal off the side of that net. And I was going to say this, Darnell Nurse, there's a lot of stuff. He's got a lot of tools. If he took a look at video of Darnell Nurse, or excuse me, Dylan DeMello, and defended the way that he did, the Oilers would have been a lot better off in that series. Dylan DeMello fights it. How many times has he stolen pucks off the line? So his attitude's right. His defensive mindset is right. He fits. He's a first pairing defenseman with Josh Morrissey. The one thing I'll say about this, in Winnipeg, he's worth that money. I don't think he's worth that money almost anywhere else, Ken. And a lot of the national
media... But he was going
to get it,
though. But he was going to get it.
Okay, well, a lot of the national media showed surprise that Frank Saravelli, who we saw last night, and I just saw him, did a hit for us on the same camera I was doing those awards with, sounded surprised at the amount of money that he got. I'll be honest, I was a little bit surprised as well, but at the same time, to play that role in the NHL, that's the money it is. I just think that money may make his contract a little bit hard to move if they ever are in a situation where they have to move, but you can do worse things than pay the players that have been good soldiers for you. I don't know that the Jets have a better soldier over the last number of years than they have. Dylan DeMello absolutely loves the place.
And the leadership piece. Sorry, I shouldn't miss that. Sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted and he wants to raise his kids in this community, in the community of Manitoba. That's an important thing.
I just wanted to go back to Maurice really quickly because I didn't touch on the Winnipeg comments. I thought that they were weird. I think that's a weird thing to say. I think that I'll tell you this, again, sometimes you get the perspectives outside the market. When you talk to the national media folks, you start to understand how weird it was perceived for him to leave the Jets the way he did. I think he did a very good job of normalizing. I still remember the quote, "This is a great day." That was strange. That was strange the way he left the team. I don't think there's a good explanation. I think it left the Winnipeg Jets in a worse spot. I think it put Dave Lowry in a really bad spot to have to take over a team that was kind of in a tailspin, and he jumped out in the parachute. I have to say this, his whole story that he talks about how he was fishing and he was okay with, or expecting that he was never going to be in the NHL again. I don't buy that. I don't buy it one bit. I don't think a coach can spend 3 decades in the NHL and decide to end his career in that manner. I think Paul Maurice knew he was going to be back in the NHL, and it makes me question the timing of him jumping out on a team that was heading in the wrong direction. To me, it almost feels like a little bit of this is what I always say when Paul Maurice is saying something really charming that everyone is diving in on, like the people in Winnipeg have absolutely pounced lovingly on his comments about saying he wants the Winnipeg Jets to win. To me, that's always like he's tweaking it up a little bit to kind of cover off something else. And I think what he's covering off is the idea that he put the Winnipeg Jets in a bad spot. That's not how a coach should walk out on a team. I do think he thought he was going to be back in the NHL. And so it struck me as strange for a reason. I think that's one of the reasons I found it strange.
Yeah, just for context, I mean, I spoke with Paul Maurice days after he did the interview, had the first conversation with Bill Zito. He did not tell me it was with Bill Zito, but he left enough breadcrumbs to say, I was able to piecemeal it together. And Paul said flat out, he was thinking about coaching again, but he could be selective in where he was going to go. So I agree with part of that, but I don't think this was, Paul Maurice waiting for the Florida Panthers to fire Andrew Brunette and that he would only take that job. I mean, he was not expecting Andrew Brunette to be fired, and he wasn't expecting to hear from Bill Zito. And all of a sudden the call came, the offer was made, and his son was already going to law school in Miami. So the family was moving to Florida. So, I mean, it was a natural fit for them.
By the way, I just want to say this one thing I always say. So I'm out on the ice afterwards. I talked with Paul, did a great interview with me afterwards. And then his son, Jake, came up, tapped me on the shoulder. I think I've told this story before. I was covering that Packers-Raiders game in Winnipeg. I was talking with a bunch of NFL officials, and suddenly there was this kid kind of on my shoulder in my periphery, and I thought it was weird. Who's this kid? Why is he kind of hanging around me? I turn, and he sticks out his hand, and he says, You're Sean Reynolds, right? And I said, yes. And he shakes my hand. He says, "I'm Jake Maurice. My dad told me if I ever ran into you, I should introduce myself to you." I think that says so much about Paul Maurice as a man, as a father, as a human being. I think the way that Jake conducts himself is a phenomenal example of what a great father and what great parents Paul and his wife are. I also saw the son who was at law school. I saw his daughter, who still is a teacher in Winnipeg, still lives there to this day. A great family who came over, and I talked with a bunch of them afterwards. You could tell they liked that Winnipeg connection. We say all these kind of things, and I say the stuff, we do the analysis that we do on Paul Maurice. The one thing that should not be taken away from anything, Paul Maurice is a man that I have miles of respect for as a man, as a father, as a human being. He's done really, really good with his family and with the vast majority of his relationships as well, Ken.
And just last one with Jake, for folks who don't know and haven't seen the story. I mean, Jake Maurice is a, aspiring play-by-play guy. I mean, he's been working in the ECHL the last couple of years with the Florida Everblades, hoping to maybe move up to the American League this year. But again, this is a guy who has the name value, but he's trying to do it the hard way. He's working his behind off and trying to work his way up. He's not having his dad call people to get him a job. I mean, he's, riding the buses and doing the work. So,
we know is going to be a great success. So let's move on. And before we do it quickly, I just wanted, this has nothing to do with the Unfee program, but we both know that banking there and banking for free is great with Cambrian. I just put a balloon payment on my mortgage. It couldn't have been easier to do. The folks at Cambrian really helped out. I just wanted to bring that up because our personal experiences are one of the reasons why we have this connection with Cambrian. We both are able to kind of sing from the rooftops what they do for us. Ken, did you want to give Sweet Lou a shout out before we do this?
Sorry, yes.
I can help you out here. Do your thing.
Please, sorry, I had something at work here. Sorry.
Oh,
you can take it.
Well,
I'll take it. Sorry. For folks who have realty needs that need to be met, whether you're buying, selling, curious what the house on the corner is going for, contact our main man, Lou Ferland, at Royal LePage Dynamic Realty, 204-791-9971, or at the office, 204-989-5000. His email is lou@louferland.ca. That's LOU@LOUFURLAN.ca. Lou Ferland, excellent realtor, excellent human being, and excellent supporter of the community, including this podcast.
And Ken, the Johnston Group got you covered play of the podcast right there. Not
Sorry
making
about
me do
that.
the read that I never do. The Johnston Group, all about them. Absolutely gem of a company based right here in Winnipeg that has been the biggest supporter of KNR right from the beginning. We can't thank them enough for being along for the ride. And I've been getting some texts from North End Rick, who I keep telling him I'm still on the road. He keeps calling me. He wants to go out for coffee. He wants
to do that from the other cities.
He wants to tell me why the Edmonton Oilers deserve to lose in Game 7. I know that's what he wants. He wants to tell me about how much he appreciates Paul Maurice. All stories I want to hear from him. And I appreciate the time that in their busy season when Pristine Roofing is out absolutely killing it out there. I know he's busy, that he can make time for me. It means a lot to me. So I'll see him when I get back to town. And that's the, hey, it's the Pristine Roofing wake-up call. Goes to me retroactively 2 years ago when I said on this program that I saw it being a disaster.
What a call.
A disaster for the Florida Panthers to have hired Paul Maurice. Turned out for them. Again, Ken, spit shine that NWO championship belt that I'm handing over for you doing that.
Thank you.
I saw you just quickly here, or you put up. You wanted to do Line A. You wanted. I think you wanted to do Line A because you set it aside. So you go on Patrik Laine to the Jets and tell me what you think about that. I'll go and tell you what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, you got here a day before me, but I have been dismissing folks who have been mentioning Laine, not because I wouldn't like to see him come back, but just because I thought it was a very complicated matter given the salary of $8.7 million for the next 2 seasons. So first and foremost, Patrik Laine, we hope he's doing well. We hope he gets out of the program, player assistance program shortly, and we hope he gets back to loving the NHL and playing the sport that he is exceptionally gifted at. My initial thought was maybe in looking for a fresh start, he would like to go to somewhere completely different from Columbus or Winnipeg, but a little bit of buzz from around, circles, Vegas, around the Stanley Cup. Sounds like there is some, at least some interest from Patrik Laine's
either camp or however way you want to describe it, Patrik himself, in potentially looking at a return to the place where he played his best hockey. And to me, I can make sense of that. No problem. I think that Patrik would be welcomed back with open arms if they would, find a way. There's going to have to be salary retention. I don't know what the deal would look like. This is a salary dump scenario for Columbus. Will there have to be a sweetener attached, or is it as easy as, holding back some of the money with retention? I don't know. Is it a perfect fit? I'm not sure. But what I do know is that the Jets' power play has been lacking, and he would give them, the Jets have taken incredible strides, as we've talked about, as Connor Hellebuyck talked about again today, on the defensive side of the puck, but they're not scoring at the level that they had been previously. So again, it's chicken and egg. Now you got to find, much like we talked about the Dallas Stars, Sean, the Dallas Stars' biggest problem used to be they didn't score enough. They could defend, right, but then they went the other way and scored a lot and didn't defend as much, but they found the sweet spot this year. Can the Jets do the same? And could Patrik Laine be part of that solution? Again, I'm not saying it's happening, but I'm more open to the idea of it happening than maybe I was a week or two ago. And again, I mean, we're always thinking about bigger picture and other things. Like, lots of people wish Teemu Selanne would have come back and played for the Jets again at some point in his career. And we know what it was like when he came back in 2011, probably the most unique game we've ever seen involving the Jets, where one visiting player was booed every time he touched the puck, and the rest of cheered when he touched the puck, and the rest of them were booed. We saw what it was like when Teemu's son, who was wearing a Jets jersey, came down to see him after the game, how moved he was emotionally. I mean, so could you see Laine wanting to be part of that again? Sure. And if you're the Jets, Sean, we've talked about this. When the Jets had Patrik Laine, they were a global brand. They had interest globally in one of the most exciting players in the National Hockey League. When he left, they lost an element of that. So to me, I could see on both sides how they could want a reunion, how they make it work in terms of a trade and retention. That I'm certainly not clear about yet, but I would be more bullish than I was on it 2 weeks ago, is how I'd put it.
Okay.
And I don't think it's imminent. Sorry, I also don't think it's imminent.
Yeah. I'll say this. Initially, I didn't think that this was a possibility. To be honest with you, I don't think it's much of a possibility going forward. I didn't hear about it at the national level. I've touched with like a lot of people like in that orbit and never heard anything about that. I heard about it in Winnipeg. I think if you think about it, what it would look like, right now, the Winnipeg Jets have a very established top line. They're going to be rebuilding a second line. So unless they're thinking, okay, we've got this specific guy who's going to play alongside, or maybe they think Cole Perfetti is going to take a step and he would be magic with the likes of Patrik Laine. I think the issue with those two players, or those are two players that work and operate best when people on their line open up space for them. But I just think what you're looking at is Patrik Laine coming back and running into the same problem Ehlers has ran into the last number of years, and the same problem he did when he was here, and that there seemed to be an upper crust that he couldn't break through. I don't necessarily see a guy like Mark Scheifele inviting the idea of breaking up what he wants there right now to put Patrik Laine on that line. So I think what would happen is if you did bring him in, there would be a continuation of problems. I think the stuff that happened that led to Patrik Laine wanting to be out of town, I think some of those elements are not there anymore, but I think some of them are. I think as an organization, there was a little bit of hard feelings on both sides. I think personally, the welcome back video that they showed was just a gross display of that. Like, I thought what Patrik Laine did was basically be historically one of the greatest teenage point producers and goal scorers of all time in the history of the NHL, was welcomed back with kind of a shared video with Roslovic and Pascal Dupuis. I thought that was Pascal Vincent. I thought that was poor form on the part of the Jets. I think it showed how they felt about that. I think that there's maybe more hard feelings here, but I will say this, Ken, Patrik Laine, the last feeling that he had of hockey being free-flowing and maybe even easy, and that feeling of, being accomplished and putting up numbers. The last place he felt that was in Winnipeg. So maybe, just maybe, he would be interested in coming back and trying to rediscover himself in a place where he had found himself. That makes sense to me. I'm not hearing it anywhere other than
Kyprios,
in
though,
Winnipeg
he's
circle,
national.
so.
Kyprios mentioned it as a possibility. That,
Yeah,
again,
I think that, maybe. I'm just saying, for the most part, that's been
it's
met
fair.
with,
It's totally fair. Yeah.
I don't know about that.
And that's
so,
why I said
anyway.
I didn't say it was front burner. I just said it was, more of a even a remote possibility than I was completely outright in dismissing it weeks ago. And again, I still think it's unlikely, but maybe there's a sliver of the door open potentially. Who knows?
Okay, we got to get going on McGroarty.
Yep.
And so this is something I had, we never did anything on this, Ken. We had meant to do it time and time again on the show, and we never got to McGroarty after the news was that he was going back. You and I were on very different sides of this. I'm going to need that NWO belt back that I had earlier on, because I had been saying, when everyone, it seemed, in Winnipeg was saying there's not an issue here, I was telling you at that time that McGroarty was gone.
Yep.
I'm going to give you my breakdown. All the stuff that is said about, the way that the Jets handle their prospects and the Cole Perfetti and stuff like that. I think that's all bluster coming from that camp that is designed to make the Winnipeg populace not frustrated and angry at McGroarty, but frustrated and angry with the team. And, oh, wow, well, he doesn't want to come here because he's not going to get to play. Yeah. I'll quickly go through the thing. Like, all the people out there who think that guys should just be given spots here and moving on, take a look at the Dallas Stars. They are the model right now on how you bring up guys. Wyatt Johnston makes it into the lineup, but only by being like their best player now. That's what it took for him to get up. Jim Nill went into the office of Pete DeBoer and was like, I want to send this guy down. I can't possibly send him down. None of these guys in Winnipeg that you're talking about have done that, have come out and performed at a level that you had to say, we cannot possibly send him down. Logan Stankoven, Stankoven basically operated at that level, and Jim Nill had said about him, he should have been in the NHL a long time ago. Could have been.
Except for the Memorial Cup being in his hometown.
Exactly. So that was the conversation there, that he could have been moved up, but they wanted him to play another year of junior to have that experience. And then they still put him in the AHL in the next year, where he goes
more than 50 games.
Exactly. And he comes into the NHL and was one of their most dominant players, eye-popping. That's how you handle a guy. And then on top of that, the best player right now in the AHL, the best player probably maybe outside the NHL, is Maverick Bourque, and he's with them, and he can't get into the lineup. So all these people who think that the Winnipeg Jets are just this team that is like fumbling around in the dark and refuse to play young guys, they don't have the guys here in Winnipeg who have grabbed the brass ring the way that they have in that organization there. And you didn't hear about Logan Stankoven saying, well, this is ridiculous, and pouting, and then coming up and being like, well, I only got 1 or 2 games. You saw guys who came up and pounced on their opportunity. That's the way to do it. I'm going to do my quick McGroarty thing. This is where I think this is coming from. I've been waiting to share this for a long time. McGroarty is from the University of Michigan. The path of University of Michigan guys through Winnipeg are guys like Jacob Trouba, Andrew Kopp, and Kyle Connor. Jacob Trouba came to Winnipeg, had potentially wanted out, was ground down. The Winnipeg Jets, all these good contracts they always have, the Ehlers contract, the Mark Scheifele contract, even the last contract that Hellebuck had before this. The Winnipeg Jets do a very good job of keeping salaries down with their RFAs. They use the control they have to keep salaries down. It's another way of saying they grind their younger players. Okay, that's my take on it. Anyways, and then what happens is finally when they get to a place like where Dylan DeMello is, that's when they pay those guys. Hellebuck, Scheifele, those guys get paid, but they grind them in the meantime. Andrew Kopp made no doubt about it that he felt ground by the Winnipeg Jets and not reflected in what he brought to the Jets in the way that he was paid. Kyle Connor is a guy, but the one way they will pay you if you're in the long-term plans of the Winnipeg Jets is they'll sign you to an extended contract, but you have to give up UFA years, which means you're here for a long time. What that means, I would like to take more time. We don't have the time to kind of like make that a little more clear. But what it means if you're Rutger McGroarty is you're going to go to Winnipeg, and I don't care about how long he plays in the AHL. When you do make the lineup, his choice is either sign a long-term deal and be in Winnipeg till he's 30, so he better know that he wants to be in Winnipeg, or go through what Jacob Trouba went through, go through what Andrew Kopp went through, and get ground down on your salary right until you're a UFA, and then leave around 26 or 27 or something like that. That's the two options that you follow. And listen, Michigan guys, I'm sure talk with each other. That's the conversation. I would be surprised if it's not happening in University of Michigan, where those Michigan guys go and skate in the summer. They all talk to each other. That's the path that Rutger McGroarty is following. So I think in this situation here, Rutger McGroarty now is closer to just getting out from underneath the Winnipeg Jets by becoming an unrestricted free agent, by sitting out. He's already said he's going to sit out another year. Now he just says, I'm going to sit out the fourth. So you either move me for something or I'm gone. He's got all the power. The NCAA affords him that power. So this, to me, is the way that the Winnipeg Jets have handled their contracts in the past, the way that all those great contracts that the Winnipeg Jets somehow find a way to sign, they do that by grinding. I think that's what's caught up to them in this situation here. But I think on top of that, it's Rutger McGroarty is an NCAA guy who is using the power he has to dictate where he goes, just like his very good friend Cutter Gauthier did, his best friend. So to me, I think the solution to this, and I think we've seen it from the Winnipeg Jets, remember, they always used to go the USHL route. They always used to take picks out of the NCAA. The Winnipeg Jets, I see them starting to move more towards the Swedish League, Finnish League, WHL, CHL. I think that's the solution for them in this situation here. But the way that they've handled the likes of Andrew Kopp, all the guys over the years, the way that they grind them down to make things work as RFAs, this is what I think caught up with the Winnipeg Jets and Rutger McGroarty.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't maybe go as far as you did. And I mean, again, I can certainly see a lot of validity to part of what you said. I mean, Andrew Kopp talked about maybe wanting to stay long-term at one point as well. I mean, we know Jacob Trouba had other family reasons too. So, but yeah, I mean, there have been a long list of people who, haven't always loved where it's at. But again, just to reinforce what you said, and I highlighted a couple of these comments. I mean, the Florida Panthers had Anton Lundell in the lineup. That's it. They didn't have a bunch of 20-year-olds in the lineup playing top six roles. Their top six was filled with veteran players. Lundell played on the third line and was a very important player. None of the Panthers defensemen were American hockey young guys. They were long-term veterans. They had OEL and Kulikov on the third pairing. They didn't have Ville Heinola on their third pairing. So, and Dylan Holloway has been up and down and in the minors for the majority of his time. So people saying that, oh, how dare they scratch Cole Perfetti? Dylan Holloway spent half the year in the minors as a first-round draft pick. You mentioned, I mean, it's just, I mean, it's not as simple as saying, oh, the Jets don't play their young players. They played all their young players at the beginning when they didn't have veteran players that were that good. And then those guys took the jobs. So of course they have to incorporate young players, but teams that are winning aren't just saying, you know what we should do? We should just give the kids the keys. The kids got to earn the keys. And Cole Perfetti had a great year in a lot of ways. He had a tough quarter of the season, and I think it will drive him to be even better this year. I spoke with Scott O'Neill this afternoon for stories that I'm working on, and I asked him about Cole Perfetti, and he reinforced what a lot of people forget. This whole Cole Perfetti should be a top six guy by now, Sean. Cole Perfetti was a top six player for the first 2 years when he was in the league, but he got season-ending injuries both of those years. And this year, he was a top six player until he went 22 games without scoring and scoring 2 goals during that time. And yes, there was a demotion down the lineup during part of that stretch, but it wasn't chicken and egg. Cole went through a tough stretch, but Cole also has missed a lot of time in the last couple of years. Him being north of 70 games was a major accomplishment. The fact that he had 19 goals, that's hard to do. 19 goals, yes, next year I expect him to get 20. So this isn't as simple as saying, oh, well, Cole's going to be
Coles wants out of here because he's not in the top 6 by year 3 when he was hurt, season-ending injuries the first 2 years. Come on, Cole is a driven individual who wants to play. Of course he wants to play. I love how he handled it. He finished the year on a high note. Yes, it would have sucked to be scratched for part of the playoffs, of course, but it will help him. He's having another long summer of training like the one before, and unlike the 2 previous ones where he's going to get himself ready to roll, and he's going to be an impact player. So, and sorry, you said Broberg before. I was thinking too. Broberg is a first-round draft pick like Ville Heinola, and he barely played in the league this year, but then showed that he made some big progress. So this is very simple to me. Quickly on Rutger. If Rutger was unhappy about the potential to be in the American League, come to the training camp and win a job.
Yeah.
This is very simple. This is the part that I don't buy for 1 second. I'm sorry. If you wanted to, we know he's going to be a good player. We know he needs to work on his skating. And yes, there are teams in the NHL where Rutger can go to and play in the NHL immediately. Can he be an impact player in the middle 6 on those teams? Well, we'll see. But to me, it's not a guarantee. And again, I think that Rutger is not Adam Fox where he's coming out of university. Rutger is a very good college player. But even getting to the Frozen Four the last 2 years, he was not dominant in those in the championship tournament. Yeah. That's not to say he can't be going forward. He also missed development time with a very serious injury. He captained Team USA to the gold medal. He's a very good player. Nobody's disputing that. But it's not as simple as saying, well, I don't agree with the path. I mean, if you don't agree with the path, my inclination would be to show them I deserve a job.
No doubt.
The Jets want him to be in the league.
This comparison is actually a good comparison in the way that Adam Fox is not a guy that, it wasn't that he didn't see an opportunity in Calgary. It's that he wanted to control his destiny and end up where it is. So this comparison, I think, fits in the way that this is the category I put Rutger McGroarty in alongside Cutter Gauthier. These are guys who are using the might of the ability to get out of that contract after 4 years. It's what Blake Wheeler did to start his NHL career, right? Like he ended up in Boston, drafted by the Coyotes, and ends up in Boston because he sits out the 4 years and then goes to whatever team he wants to go to. This, to me, is something that I think is going to start happening more and more in the NCAA. Guys are just going to decide that's not where I want to play. There's a better path for me. I'm going to threaten to sit out, and the fact that the clock is constantly ticking on these players, it gives them leverage that other players just do not have over their teams.
And here, as C-Mac points out, it doesn't always work out. Nathan Smith was a guy who we thought was going to be in the NHL by now. Hasn't made the NHL yet. So
totally.
And just one quick thing, and there's a lot of interest. I'm not sure if I had to guess, I would say it's going to happen before the end of round 1 tomorrow. I mean, Sean, we'll get into just quickly. We know both of us are hearing the same thing. A lot of interest the Jets have in maybe trying to get into the first round, specifically if they're very interested in T.J. Ginla, which would mean they'd have to do a lot of moving and shaking to get into the top 10 probably. Carter Yakimchuk is a guy who is also another interesting scenario type of player. Defenseman, big, strong, booming defenseman, big shot from the point from the Calgary Hitmen. He's a guy that's on their radar for sure. But again, I don't. It's not a guarantee they get into the top 10. And I would just say too, like just in talking with Mike McIntyre, my colleague today, sounds like the Boston Bruins are another team that's interested in potentially pursuing Rutger McGroarty. I mean, there would be some defensemen in Boston that the Jets would be interested in. Again, can they make a deal? I'm not sure. And can it be part of a bigger deal where it's a big swing? Could it involve Nikolai Ehlers? Could it involve draft picks, prospects, maybe shedding salary? There's all kinds of things on the table for tomorrow, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I think it's going to be a fun weekend no matter what, but I'd be surprised if the Jets weren't in the middle of a few things. And I would also say this. I do expect the Jets to continue to pursue Sean Monahan. And again, there's going to be competition there, but I still think that they see that as a big priority going into the next few days here.
I just wanted to touch on it. Someone said about the numbers. It's showing 3,061 people at this moment. It wasn't showing very good on the phone. Anyway,
including the X viewers, apparently.
Yes, exactly. We're a real hit on X. There you go. Maybe Elon's helping us out. Yeah,
indeed.
One thing I wanted to say before we go, the one thing I keep hearing here that is just absolutely fascinating is there's so many different kinds of players in this draft. So like Zane Perret, I talked to him about Denton Mateychuk, who I think is going to be a star out of Manitoba with Columbus. Denton is 2 years older than Zane, and they squared off at the Memorial Cup, and they both went off in that game. They were the two best players in that game. One's about to be drafted here, and people look at him as being maybe the kind of like offensive talent from the blue line that like you don't really see it very often, like the kind of guys that you don't know how he does it, but he just does it. One of these brilliant guys. And I've seen him like as low as 18 on some lists. I've seen him almost near 5 on some other lists. The one thing that was said, Craig Conroy put it really, really, really interesting, is there's so many different guys that it's almost like you're better off to draft for needs in this draft. You want an offensive defenseman? Well, he may not be as good as this defensive defenseman, right? And this guy may play in the NHL for longer, but there's kind of like, oh, you want this kind of guy? He's there. You want this kind of guy? He's there. And it's upper echelon talent. So what Craig Conroy thinks is what's going to happen more and more in this draft than he's seen happen before is teams are going to be like, you know what? We need a big booming shot from the point, and we're going to go out and get Yakimchuk out of the WHL, right? We need like a big, heavy forward. We're going to try and get Lindstrom. T. Ginla is clearly getting a lot of play here. And you know, I've heard a whole bunch of stories about teams trying to get up there. Because of this is what I'm saying. I think the Jets have a couple of very, very specific needs. And I think that this is the kind of draft that if they can get into the top 15, top 10, they can take a pretty good shot at going for a guy who may be on another team. Yeah, he worked out okay, but almost exactly the fit that the Winnipeg Jets need. So I expect them to push. I expect them to try and use that Rutger McGroarty piece to try and make a trade that not only gets them back assets from that team, real-time assets, and it would take more coming from the Jets, obviously. Maybe they package them up with Nick Ehlers or something like that. But I think they really do want to get into the top 15, probably more along the lines of top 10 in that draft. And even if they were able to make that trade, use that draft pick to draft up and pick other teams. I heard a very interesting story about one team saying to another team, well, we're going to specifically take a guy we know you want. There's another guy that we really kind of want. And if he's still there when it's time for you to pick, you pick him and then you send him to us with another asset and we'll send you the original guy. Like a lot of really clever things like that happening here. So I think it's fascinating. I think it could be a little bit of the Wild West. I think if the Jets need to move Rutger McGroarty, which I think they do, that's all I keep hearing down here from everybody else. Frank Saravelli talked extensively on it about it on Sportsnet earlier on today. If you got to move the guy, why not move him to try and get into something and take a really big swing? It sounds like this is the year to get that very specific need you need. And I think the Winnipeg Jets, I brought up Yakimchuk. That booming shot is something they have not had since Dustin Byfuglien retired. Getting that shot from the point may be exactly what someone like the Winnipeg Jets are looking for. And then you got like so many of the other guys like Berkeley Cat and all these. There are some really, really interesting guys here. I think the Winnipeg Jets would find it really fun to get into the top 10.
Yeah, and if they can't, I mean, I would just use, again, I'm with you. I think it's more likely he will be moved. But I've also heard from a couple people that said, if he's going back to school anyway, which again, he can change his mind at any time, maybe his value might be even higher at the trade deadline. But the counter to that is if Michigan's not as good a team and he doesn't have as good a year, maybe potentially hurt the value.
Yeah, I think he's moving. Someone said totally here about, I'll believe it when I see it. Yeah, that's bogus. He's gone. But I'm in the school of thought that I know Kevin Cheveldayoff usually likes to sit on something until he gets exactly what he wants. That's a quickly depreciating value for that reason, but also the further you go with them, the less opportunity the next team has to take care of it. So I think they got to move on from him, do it quick. Ken, that's totally it for us. got to say, it's good to be back doing this again. Good to see so many people out. It means a lot that everyone stopped. I know we gave you like 2 minutes warning on this thing. We apologize.
That was
for
my
that.
fault for writing.
It's not Ken's fault. It's actually, I'm down here. I did the draft last year. I had a lot more free space and time. It's not like that. It's not going to be like that tomorrow either. Ken and I are going to figure out a way to do something after the first round of the draft. We'll go over all of that with everybody because we'll have a little bit more time then. But I want to thank you for finding us. Thank you for taking the time. Once you did find us, means a ton. And I want to, of course, implore you to, if you do appreciate the conversation happening in this space, please appreciate the contributions by our sponsors who fight to keep the conversation going in this space. That would be Vittorio Rossi, Pristine Roofing, Cambrian Credit Union, Sweet Lou Furlan, the Johnston Group, the Keg, and of course, TransCanada Brewing Company. Thank you to them. Thank you to all of you. We will see you tomorrow night, and we'll try and give you a little bit more of a heads up when we're going to do the show. Either way, we appreciate you stopping your world tonight to spend some time with us. Thank you for that.